The 4th of July, 1776. A group of men signed a document that declared, "All men are created equal." Those words became the heart of the American Revolution. Yet, while the ink was still drying, nearly 500,000 black Americans remained enslaved across the colonies. So why did thousands of them choose to fight in this war? Why did some wear the uniform of the Patriots, while others fought for the British crown? What made George Washington abandon his early refusal to enlist black soldiers? Did military service bring the freedom so many hoped for, or were those promises left on the battlefield? And if their sacrifices helped shape the birth of the United States, why did their stories almost disappear from history? The answers don't fit neatly into stories of heroes and villains. They reveal a revolution where freedom meant different things to different people, and where survival often mattered more than loyalty. To understand their choices, we have to return to the America that existed before the first shot of the Revolutionary War was fired. By 1775, Britain's 13 American colonies were home to nearly 500,000 enslaved black people. In the southern colonies, plantations depended on their labor. In northern ports, enslaved men and women loaded ships, built roads, worked in homes, and practiced skilled trades. Slavery wasn't a small part of colonial life. It was woven into its economy. At the same time, resistance to British rule was growing louder. Colonial leaders spoke passionately about natural rights, liberty, and freedom from tyranny. Crowds gathered to protest new taxes. Newspapers praised the idea that no people should live under oppression. For black Americans, those words carried a different weight. Many wondered whether the calls for liberty would ever include them, or whether this revolution was only meant for others. As armed conflict drew closer, thousands faced a choice no one else had to make: remaining where they were meant to accept a life in bondage. Joining either side meant risking death for a promise that might never be kept. Then, before George Washington had fully organized his army, one decision from a British official changed the war and the lives of countless enslaved people, almost overnight. The question was no longer whether to fight, but who was truly offering freedom. In November 1775, Virginia's royal governor, Lord Dunmore, made an announcement that spread through the colonies with astonishing speed. He promised freedom to enslaved men owned by Patriot masters if they escaped and joined the British forces. For many enslaved people, it was the first public offer of freedom made by a government during the conflict. The risk was enormous. Reaching British lines often meant slipping away at night, crossing forests, rivers, and roads filled with armed patrols. Those who were caught could face severe punishment, or even death. Even so, hundreds fled within weeks. Before long, that number grew into the thousands. Plantation owners feared not only losing workers, but also the possibility of a much larger wave of escapes. Patriot leaders worried that the proclamation could weaken their cause before the war had truly begun. Many of the men who reached British camps joined Dunmore's Ethiopian regiment, wearing uniforms stitched with the words, "Liberty to slaves." Yet one difficult question remained. Was Britain genuinely offering freedom, or were these men simply becoming another weapon in a war between two rival powers? When the Revolutionary War began, George Washington had no intention of recruiting black soldiers into the Continental Army. In 1775, he supported a policy that largely excluded both enslaved and most free black men from enlisting. Military leaders feared unrest, and many slave-owning colonies strongly opposed the idea of arming black Americans. But the war refused to follow anyone's plans. As news of Lord Dunmore's proclamation spread, enslaved men continued escaping to British lines. At the same time, the Continental Army struggled to replace its losses. Recruiting enough soldiers became increasingly difficult, especially after the excitement of the war's opening months faded. Military necessity began to outweigh political concerns. Within months, Washington agreed to allow many free black men to enlist, reversing his earlier position. Several states went even further, promising freedom to some enslaved men if they served in the Continental Army, although those promises were not always fulfilled. The decision strengthened the Patriot forces, but it also exposed a painful contradiction. A nation fighting for its own liberty was asking Black Americans to risk their lives without guaranteeing theirs. If they were finally allowed to fight, could they also prove they were indispensable on the battlefield? As the war spread across the colonies, Black Americans became part of nearly every corner of the conflict. Some marched beside white soldiers in integrated Continental Army units. Others served aboard warships, carried vital supplies, built fortifications, or gathered intelligence behind enemy lines. Their contributions reached far beyond the front lines. Among them was Peter Salem, a formerly enslaved man from Massachusetts. Many historians credit him with firing the shot that killed British Major John Pitcairn during the Battle of Bunker Hill, though parts of that account remain debated. His courage became a symbol of Black participation in the Patriot cause. Another name has echoed through American history for a different reason. Crispus Attucks, a sailor of African and Native American ancestry, was killed during the Boston Massacre in 1770. Although his death came before the Revolutionary War officially began, he is widely remembered as the first person to die in the struggle that led to American independence. Their bravery challenged the belief that Black Americans had no place in the fight for liberty. Yet, even as they proved themselves on the battlefield, another question refused to disappear. Would their service earn them equal rights, or would victory leave them standing exactly where they had begun? Not every Black American believed the Patriots offered the best path to freedom. As the war continued, thousands chose the British instead. They served as soldiers, guides, sailors, laborers, and scouts. Others supported the army by building defenses, transporting supplies, or caring for the wounded. Their decision was rarely about loyalty to the British crown. For many, it was a desperate attempt to escape slavery. Britain expanded its promises as the conflict dragged on. In 1779, Sir Henry Clinton issued the Philipsburg Proclamation, offering protection to many enslaved people who escaped from Patriot owners, even if they did not enlist. The announcement encouraged even more people to flee, turning the war into a growing struggle over both independence and slavery. Life inside British camps, though, was far from the freedom many had imagined. Disease spread quickly. Food was often scarce. Some died before the war ended, while others discovered that promises made in wartime could be difficult to keep. When British defeat became inevitable, another painful question emerged. If the British sailed away, would they leave these men and women behind, or would they honor the freedom they had promised? The war finally came to an end in 1783. For thousands of Black loyalists, victory no longer mattered. Survival did, as British forces prepared to leave New York. A difficult promise stood before them. Years earlier, British commanders had offered freedom to enslaved people who reached their lines. If they abandoned them now, that promise would mean nothing. To prevent that, British officials created an extraordinary document known as the Book of Negroes. It recorded the names, ages, physical descriptions, former owners, and destinations of nearly 3,000 Black men, women, and children who were allowed to leave with the British. Many sailed to Nova Scotia, hoping to begin new lives as free people. Others eventually settled in Britain, the Caribbean, or later helped establish Freetown in Sierra Leone. Freedom had finally arrived for many. Yet, it came with a painful cost. They were leaving behind the only home they had ever known, uncertain whether the next one would truly welcome them. For those who had fought alongside the Patriots, the future held a different kind of uncertainty. Did the new United States keep its promises to the Black soldiers who had helped win its independence? When the Treaty of Paris officially ended the Revolutionary War in 1783, church bells rang, cannons fired, and crowds celebrated the birth of a new nation. For many Black veterans, the celebrations felt distant. Some who had served in the Continental Army received the freedom they had been promised. Others returned home only to discover that those promises had vanished with the fighting. In several states, former enslaved soldiers had to petition courts or legislatures for the liberty they believed they had earned. Some succeeded. Many did not. Even free black veterans faced another barrier. Military service did not erase discrimination. Land grants, pensions, and public recognition often reached them years late, or never arrived at all. Their courage on the battlefield did not guarantee equality in civilian life. Yet their sacrifice was not entirely without consequence. The Revolution sparked growing debates about slavery across the new United States. Northern states gradually began moving toward abolition, while slavery expanded further in much of the South, deepening a conflict that would shape the nation's future for generations. One question still remained unanswered. If Black Americans helped shape the nation's founding, why did so many of their names disappear from the story that followed? For decades after the Revolution, the stories of Black Americans who fought in the war slowly faded from public memory. History books celebrated famous generals, decisive battles, and the birth of a new nation. For Black Americans, that meaning was deeply personal, often uncertain, and sometimes painfully out of reach. Their names may have been forgotten by many. Their choices helped shape the nation that emerged from the Revolution. And perhaps the greatest lesson they leave behind is this: history is never only about those whose stories are remembered. It is also about those whose voices waited centuries to be heard. The American Revolution is often remembered as a fight for liberty. That story is true, but it is incomplete. Black Americans stood on both sides of the battlefield, not because they shared the same loyalties, but because they were searching for the same thing: freedom. Some believed the Patriots offered hope. Others believed the British offered a better chance. Many discovered that neither path guaranteed the future they had imagined. Their courage can still be found in military records, faded letters, pension files, and the pages of the Book of Negroes. Together, these fragments reveal a history that refuses to fit into simple categories of right and wrong. The Revolution created a new nation. It also exposed the distance between the ideals written on paper and the reality experienced by millions. Perhaps that is the most enduring legacy of these forgotten men and women. They remind us that history is not only shaped by those whose names fill monuments. It is also shaped by those whose sacrifices were nearly erased, and whose stories continue to change the way we understand the birth of the United States.